I remember the night I walked into my sister's wedding. The chandeliers blazed overhead, laughter filled the air, and then the doors opened. I stepped inside wearing a simple dress, nothing fancy, but the hush that fell over the room was louder than any music. Some people blinked in confusion. Others stared as if they had seen a ghost. I knew what they were whispering. To them, I was the failure, the sister who had nothing to show for a lifetime of sacrifice. But that night, everything was about to change. Have you ever been judged by the very people you loved most, dismissed by family who only saw what they wanted to see? I had given 2 decades of my life to the army, serving as a military police officer, deploying twice to the Middle East. At 19, I had carried a rifle across deserts most people only read about in headlines. At 39, I retired honorably after 20 years of service. And yet, to my family, I was little more than a shadow of who they thought I should be. Before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if stories of courage and resilience speak to you. And share in the comments where you are listening from and what hour it is in your corner of the world. It is always moving to see how far these stories travel and whose hearts they reach. Because this is not just my story. It is a story about silence and survival, about betrayal and redemption, and about what it means when the soldier you once dismissed stands before you, no longer asking for your approval, but claiming her own truth. I was 19 the day I signed my enlistment papers. Most of my friends were decorating dorm rooms or chasing college football tickets. I was standing in a fluorescent office with my right hand raised, swearing an oath to defend a country that barely knew my name. My father's old flag hung in our living room back home, folded and framed, and I remember thinking that if I could honor him in some way, maybe I would stop feeling like the invisible child. That was the beginning. 20 years pass faster than you think. One moment you are a kid fumbling with a too large uniform, and the next you are leading patrols through streets choked with dust and fear. I spent 2 deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, saw villages that still haunt my sleep, and stood in ceremonies where medals were pinned to my chest that I never felt worthy of. The Bronze Star, a commendation for valor. They are locked in a box in my closet now. To me, the real reward was watching my soldiers make it home alive. At 39, I retired. 20 years of service carved into my bones. The army called it honorable retirement. My body called it exhaustion. My heart called it unfinished business. I moved back to a small town in Nebraska, quiet streets, neighbors who waved, the kind of place where the grocery clerk remembered your name. I thought I might find peace there. But peace is never guaranteed when you return to a family that long ago decided who you were allowed to be. The first Sunday dinner after I came home is etched in my mind like shrapnel lodged under the skin. The O'Neill kitchen smelled of rosemary chicken and fresh bread, the way it had when Mom was alive. My younger sister Allison, now a polished professor with a voice that carried authority in every syllable, sat at the head of the table as if she had inherited the throne. My brother Thomas, sharp suit pressed, gold watch flashing every time he reached for his wine glass, filled the room with the confidence of a man who believed success could be measured by the shine of cufflinks. I arrived in jeans and a cardigan I had picked up from the discount rack. No medals, no stories, no armor, just me. The conversation drifted easily at first. Allison described her new course on comparative literature. Thomas bragged about the expansion of his company, the new offices opening in Chicago. I listened, smiled when appropriate, sipped water. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be one of those rare dinners where we remembered we were siblings before we were critics. Then Allison turned to me. "So, Katie," she said, tilting her head with that careful blend of curiosity and pity, "what are you doing with yourself now that you are retired?" Her pause before the word retired stung more than it should have. She said it the way someone might say broken or expired. I opened my mouth, considered telling the truth, that I was consulting quietly with a nonprofit that supported veterans struggling with homelessness, but I stopped. Experience had taught me that no matter what I said, my answer would be measured against their invisible scale of achievement and found lacking. "I'm taking it slow," I said instead. "Adjusting, figuring out what comes next." Thomas chuckled, low and sharp. "So nothing, in other words." The words hung in the air like smoke. Have you ever had someone dismiss years of your life with a single sentence? I wonder if you have ever felt that twist in your stomach, the mix of anger and shame, even when you know you have nothing to be ashamed of. If you have, share it in the comments. Sometimes it helps to say it out loud, to know you are not alone in that kind of hurt. I stared at him, willing myself not to react. Allison reached for her wine, eyes gleaming. You know, Katie, not everyone can handle the transition. It must be strange, having no title now, no real career. No title, no career, as if the years in uniform were just a hobby I had outgrown. Thomas leaned back, his chair creaking. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his checkbook. Yes, a real paper checkbook, as if the gesture itself carried more weight in ink. I want to help you, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He scribbled a number, tore the paper, and slid it across the table. $10,000. Take this, Katie, get some classes, maybe start something small. It's time you got your life together. The paper lay between us like an accusation. $10,000. To him, pocket change. To me, a price tag on 2 decades of service. I did not touch it. I remember staring at that check, the ink still wet, the numbers bold against the paper. $10,000. It might as well have been a slap across the face. For a moment the kitchen fell quiet. I could hear the tick of the old clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, the scrape of Allison's fork against her plate. I thought about the men and women I had led overseas, the nights we had slept in dirt, the mornings we had buried friends. I thought about the flag folded in my father's frame, the weight of it when it was handed to my mother after his funeral. What was that worth? Apparently $10,000. I slid the check back across the table. Keep it, I said softly. Thomas frowned. Katie, don't be stubborn, I'm trying to help you. You are not helping me, I replied, my voice steady but edged with steel. You are insulting me. Allison let out a little laugh, the kind that stings more than open cruelty. Oh, come on, he is trying to give you a chance to move forward. You cannot live in the past forever. The past, that is what they called 20 years of service. That is what they called standing guard in the desert heat, convoying through hostile streets, counseling soldiers who wanted to end their own lives. The past, as if it were some bad decision in college I should get over. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the tile. I stood, feeling the air shift around me. I am not ashamed of my past, I said, and I do not need saving. I walked out of the kitchen, down the hallway lined with family photos. Pictures of Allison in cap and gown, Thomas shaking hands at ribbon cuttings, Mom and Dad smiling with pride. There were pictures of me too, but fewer, always in uniform, always on the margins. When I closed the door behind me that night, the cold Nebraska air hit my lungs like a reminder. I was no longer a soldier, but I was not broken either. I was something in between, and I had yet to learn what that meant. The weeks that followed were quiet, too quiet. Retirement was supposed to be a rest, a chance to breathe, but for me it felt like exile. My neighbors waved, but they did not know what I carried. In town, I was simply Katie O'Neill, the woman who had come back from the army with nothing but stories. Some whispered I had failed out, others assumed I had been discharged for reasons too shameful to name. Rumors have a way of spreading in small towns like prairie fires. I took long walks down Main Street, past the diner, the post office, the library where the same flagpole stood out front. Sometimes I would see young men and women fresh out of high school talking about where they were headed. College, trade school. Some of them whispered about enlisting. I wondered if they knew what they were asking of themselves. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun dip low. My phone buzzed. A message from Allison. She had written, "We only want what's best for you." I stared at the words, simple, almost kind, but heavy with assumption. What she meant was, "We want you to be what we can accept." I did not reply. It was around then that I started volunteering with a local nonprofit that supported veterans. I did not tell Allison or Thomas. They would not have understood. We worked out of a small office downtown, peeling paint, coffee pot always brewing. We handed out food vouchers, helped fill out housing forms, sometimes just listened when someone needed to talk. There was one man, James, who had served in Vietnam. He lived in his truck behind the old hardware store. When I brought him blankets and hot coffee, he said, "People forget us. Until we are gone, then they remember our names on walls." I carried his words with me. The work was quiet, unseen, but it felt real. It grounded me in ways the silence of my own house never could. Yet even as I poured myself into it, my family's words lingered like a bruise. Have you ever felt that? Doing something that mattered, knowing in your bones it mattered, but still hearing the voices of doubt from people you once looked up to? If you have, share a piece of it in the comments. Sometimes our stories find strength in each other. One evening, Allison called. Her voice was smooth, polished, the same tone she used when lecturing a classroom. "Mom and Dad would have wanted you to do more with your life," she said. My chest tightened. "I gave 20 years to this country," I replied. "I know, but that is over now. You cannot just hang on to that forever. You need to build something new." "I am building something," I said. "Helping homeless vets fill out paperwork is not building," she snapped. Her words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they revealed what she believed. To her, value meant visibility. Titles, salaries, recognition. The quiet work of healing did not count. I ended the call before I said something I would regret. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Memories washed over me. Sandstorms in Iraq that swallowed the horizon. The sound of helicopters thumping against the sky. The faces of young soldiers who had looked to me for guidance, for strength, for hope. I remembered standing at a memorial service, a pair of boots, a rifle, a helmet on display, dog tags clinking in the wind. I remembered pressing folded flags into trembling hands, whispering words that never seemed enough. And I remembered my sister's voice, dismissing all of it as the past. The fracture in my family was not about money or status. It was about blindness. They could not see me. They could not see the cost of those 20 years. They saw a sister who had come home without a title, without a fortune, without a ladder to climb. They did not see the scars, visible and invisible, or the strength it took to carry them. I realized then that the battle was no longer overseas. It was here at home in the quiet war between perception and truth. Weeks later, I was invited to another family dinner. I almost declined, but something in me wanted to face them again. Maybe part of me hoped for change. The kitchen looked the same long oak table, the same smell of rosemary chicken, but I was not the same. Allison asked about my work again. This time I told her plainly. I am working with veterans who have nowhere else to go. I help them find shelter, food, and a reason to keep going. It may not impress your colleagues, but it saves lives. She blinked, caught off guard. Thomas cleared his throat. That sounds noble, but it does not pay the bills, does it? I laughed then, a short, sharp sound. Not everything is about money, Thomas. Some things are about dignity. The silence that followed was heavy, but I did not fill it. Later, driving home under the cold Nebraska stars, I thought about that silence. Maybe they would never understand. Maybe they did not need to, because the truth was simple. I had already earned my worth. I did not need their approval to know it. Still, the wound remained. The fracture was there, deep and raw. I did not yet know that one day, in a glittering wedding hall, the truth would come crashing into their perfect world. For now, I carried it quietly, waiting. If you have ever felt underestimated, if you have ever carried a truth no one seemed willing to see, let me know in the comments. Tell me how you found the strength to keep going. Because stories like these are not just mine. They belong to all of us who have been told we are less, only to discover we are more than they ever imagined. After leaving the army, I thought my battles were over. I had served my 20 years, hung up the uniform, and told myself that now I would rest. But rest is not what came. What came was silence, the kind that stretches through an empty house and crawls under your skin. For the first time since I was 19, there was no mission, no patrol, no formation waiting at dawn. I had traded the sound of helicopters and radios for the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of old floorboards. That silence could have swallowed me whole, but I refused to let it. A friend from my last duty station called one afternoon. He had moved into nonprofit work, helping veterans who were struggling to adjust. He said they needed more hands, especially women who understood what it meant to serve. I did not hesitate. The very next week, I was sitting in a cramped office above a pawn shop, listening to stories that echoed my own. We called it the center, though it was little more than a space with second-hand desks and a coffee maker that never stopped brewing. Veterans drifted in, some carrying everything they owned in a backpack, others so weary they could hardly look you in the eye. My job was to meet them where they were, no judgment, no questions they were not ready to answer. One man, Tony, came in with a limp that spoke of old wounds. He had been sleeping under a bridge, clutching his discharge papers like proof of a life he no longer recognized. When I found him a bed at a shelter, he cried into his hands. "I thought everyone forgot me," he whispered. I told him he was not forgotten, not as long as we still had each other. It was not glamorous work. No medals, no ceremonies. Just long hours of paperwork, tense phone calls with landlords, and nights spent driving through alleys to find veterans before winter froze them out. Yet, in that hidden grind, I felt closer to my purpose than I ever had in a boardroom or at a family dinner. I did not tell Allison or Thomas. They would have dismissed it as charity work, a pastime. But I knew better. Saving one person from despair mattered. Helping one young woman escape the trap of traffickers mattered. Even if no one clapped for me, even if my own blood refused to see it, I knew. Have you ever carried a purpose that no one else could understand? Something you kept quiet because the world might belittle it if you spoke too loudly? If you have, I would love for you to share in the comments. It is powerful to see how many of us walk that same hidden path. The first time I was asked to join an intervention with law enforcement, I almost said no. The police captain had heard about my background in military police and wanted an extra set of eyes for a sting operation. It was risky, he said, but they could use someone who knew how to stay calm under pressure. I could have stayed behind a desk, but my instincts said otherwise. Service does not end with discharge. It changes shape, but it never truly leaves your blood. So I agreed. That night we sat in unmarked cars outside a rundown motel on the edge of town. Neon lights flickered, casting sickly glows over the parking lot. I watched men come and go, eyes darting, hands twitching. Somewhere inside those walls were girls too young to be there, trapped by men who saw them as nothing more than currency. When the signal came, my heart pounded with a rhythm I had not felt since deployment. We moved in, the door splintered, shouts filled the hall. I found myself guiding two terrified girls out through a side exit. Their wrists were bruised, their clothes torn, but their eyes held a spark of life that had not yet been extinguished. One of them clung to me, whispering, "Are we safe now?" I nodded, though I knew safety was a long road. "You are safe tonight," I told her, "and we will fight for your tomorrows." Later, when the adrenaline drained, I sat in my car and cried. Not because I was weak, but because I knew those girls might never remember my name, and that was exactly how it should be. Their freedom, not my recognition, was the point. I did not tell my family about that night. I doubted they would believe me. To them, I was the sister who had failed to make anything of herself after the army. If they could not respect 20 years of service, why would they respect the quiet heroics of a nonprofit worker? But I carried that night with me like a hidden metal pinned to my heart. Every time I drove past that motel, I remembered the feel of those small hands gripping mine, the weight of responsibility, the relief in their eyes. Some mornings I woke before dawn, sat with a cup of coffee, and thought about the soldiers I had led overseas. I realized that my mission had never ended. It had simply shifted from deserts and battlefields to streets and shelters. From protecting comrades in arms to protecting those no one else saw. And maybe that was the truest kind of service. If you are listening now, maybe you have lived through your own hidden service. Maybe you have carried someone else's burden in silence, without applause, without credit. How did you keep going when no one seemed to notice? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight. The more I worked, the more I saw how fragile dignity can be. A roof, a meal, a kind word, these were not luxuries. They were lifelines. I began to understand that the battles fought at home were no less brutal than those overseas. They were quieter, yes, but no less deadly. Addiction, poverty, despair, these were enemies too. I remembered what one old sergeant once told me in Iraq. "It's not about medals, O'Neill. It's about the guy next to you making it home." That truth carried me into every day at the center. It did not matter if I made headlines. It mattered that Tony had a warm bed, that Maria, a single mother and veteran herself, found a safe apartment for her kids, that 4 girls walked out of a motel alive. And every time doubt crept in, every time my family's dismissive words echoed, I reminded myself, this work mattered, even if they never knew. The call came on a Thursday evening, just as I was rinsing dishes in the sink. The winter wind rattled the windows, and I had settled into the quiet rhythm of another lonely night when my phone buzzed. It was the captain again. His tone was clipped, urgent. They had a tip. A van carrying trafficked girls was expected to pass through our county on its way to the border. They needed extra eyes, someone they could trust, someone who knew how to keep calm when everything around her was breaking apart. I told him yes before he could even finish. We gathered in a dimly lit parking lot behind a strip mall, a handful of officers huddled around maps and grainy photos. I stood there in a plain jacket, my breath fogging in the air, listening as they laid out the plan. It felt like a briefing from my army days, the same mix of tension and focus, the same cold knowledge that lives hung in the balance. When the van finally appeared, headlights slicing through the dark, my chest tightened. Time slowed. I could see the driver's face in a quick flash as he passed under the streetlight, expression blank, eyes forward. But what I could not see weighed heavier. The girls in the back, silent, hidden, praying for a chance they might not even believe would come. The stop was fast, brutal in its precision. Officers moved in, doors yanked open, shouts filling the night. I held my ground by the rear of the van, waiting as they pulled the girls out one by one. They stumbled, blinking against the sudden light, some too weak to stand on their own. One clutched a tattered backpack like it was her only anchor in the world. Another refused to let go of her younger sister's hand. Their faces were pale, streaked with tears and exhaustion, but beneath the fear I saw the flicker of something else. Hope. I stepped forward, gently guiding them toward the waiting vehicles. My voice was calm, steady, the way I had once spoken to young soldiers trembling in their first firefight. You are safe now. We've got you. No one is going to hurt you tonight. They looked at me with wide eyes, and for a moment I felt the weight of their belief. They trusted me, a stranger, because I had shown up when they needed someone most. That trust was a sacred thing, fragile and fierce all at once. Later, after statements were taken and the van was hauled away, I sat in my car with the heater blasting. My hands shook, though not from the cold. I thought about those girls, about the way their eyes had searched mine for reassurance, about how close they had come to disappearing forever. It struck me then how invisible this war was to most people. My neighbors would wake the next morning, sip their coffee, skim the paper, and never know that 4 young lives had been pulled from the edge in the middle of the night. There would be no headlines, no parades. The only evidence was the faint echo of their footsteps as they climbed into the transport van, heading toward safety. And yet, that invisibility felt right. Service had never been about being seen. It had always been about standing in the gap, holding the line, making sure someone else had a chance to live. When I think back on that night, I realize it changed something in me. The fracture my family had carved with their disdain was still there, but it no longer defined me. Their opinions had become background noise compared to the cries of those girls, the relief in their faces when they realized they were free. I found myself working more closely with law enforcement after that. Not always on the front lines, sometimes just in support, helping victims navigate the maze of shelters and court dates. But every call mattered. Every face stayed with me. Some nights I would lie awake, haunted by the ones we did not reach in time. The sting of failure was sharp, but it pushed me harder. You learn quickly in this line of work that you cannot save everyone, but you can save someone, and that has to be enough. There were moments of light too. A young woman I had helped months earlier stopped by the center one day, her hair neatly braided, a shy smile on her face. She had found a job at a bakery, she said, and was saving for her own apartment. Before she left, she pressed a small paper bag into my hands. Inside was a loaf of warm bread. "For you," she whispered, "for not giving up on me." I held that bread as if it were the highest medal I had ever received. Allison and Thomas knew nothing of this. To them, my days were empty, my future uncertain. They could not have imagined me standing in a frozen parking lot guiding trafficked girls into safety, or sitting with a veteran in a shelter at 2 in the morning as he fought the urge to end his life. And maybe that was for the best. My work was not for their approval. It was for the Tonys and the Marias, the nameless faces who needed someone to believe in them. But sometimes, late at night, I wondered what would happen if they did know. Would they finally see me, or would they find new ways to diminish what I had done? To those of you listening, maybe you have carried your own invisible battles. Maybe you have poured yourself into work that the world overlooks, into kindness that no one else applauds. How do you remind yourself that it matters, even when others dismiss it? I would love to read your reflections in the comments. Your stories matter here. One winter evening, I drove past the center after closing. Snowflakes drifted through the air, soft and relentless. In the glow of the street lamp, I saw James, the Vietnam veteran who had once lived in his truck. He stood tall now, wearing a heavy coat we had found for him, holding a thermos of hot coffee. He waved at me, his eyes crinkling in a smile. That small gesture filled me with warmth that no fireplace could match. James had found stable housing, a community of veterans who checked in on him. He was no longer forgot, and in that moment neither was I. As I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered on. I sat there in the car, listening to the engine tick, letting the quiet settle around me. My hands rested on the steering wheel, and I whispered to myself, "This matters." Because it did. Every form filled out, every blanket handed over, every frightened girl let out of the shadows, it all mattered. Even if no one clapped, even if my siblings never understood, even if my name was never spoken outside the walls of our small office. I thought about something my father once told me before he passed. "Katherine, the world will not always thank you, but if you can lay your head down at night knowing you did right, that is enough." That night, as the snow fell heavy and silent, I believed him. The quiet work after retirement was never glamorous. It was not the kind of story you boasted about at parties. But it was real, and it was mine. And in its quiet way, it gave me back the sense of mission I thought I had lost when I folded my uniform for the last time. I did not yet know how much this hidden life would collide with the polished world my siblings had built. I did not yet see the night of the wedding waiting on the horizon, when the truths I carried in silence would burst into the open. But I knew this: the measure of a life is not in applause. It is in the lives we touch, the dignity we protect, the hope we keep alive even in the darkest corners. And that, I decided, was enough for me. If this part of the story has stirred something in you, let me know in the comments. Do you believe that unseen acts of service matter just as much, or even more, than public recognition? Your voice could remind someone else that what they do in silence is not wasted. Weddings are supposed to be about joy, flowers and music and promises of forever. But as I stood outside the Riverside Country Club that spring afternoon, watching limousines pull up to the front entrance, I felt nothing close to joy. My sister Allison was inside, draped in white silk, marrying a man who carried both a medical degree and a family name that opened doors in circles most people never stepped foot in. I was not invited. Not really. The irony was sharp. My name had been left off the family invitations. No embossed envelope with delicate calligraphy had arrived at my door. Allison had made it clear months earlier that I was not welcome, that her fiancé's family valued status and reputation, and that a sister with no career, no husband, and no wealth would only be a shadow on her perfect day. But life has a way of weaving threads none of us can see until the fabric is revealed. The nonprofit where I worked had been quietly supported by her fiancé's family foundation. And when the director asked me to attend the wedding reception as a representative of our veterans program, I had no choice but to say yes. Refusing would have looked ungrateful. Accepting meant stepping into a hall full of people who believed they already knew my worth. As I walked across the marble floor of the entrance hall, I caught sight of myself in the glass doors. I wore a simple navy dress, hair pulled back, no jewelry except for a small silver cross my mother had once given me. It was not glamour, but it was me. Inside, the air was heavy with perfume and the low hum of conversation. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, waiters moved with practiced grace, and every detail spoke of money. I found my seat at a table near the back, away from the main family cluster. From here I could see the head table where Allison and her new husband would soon sit, faces glowing with approval from their guests. I had barely settled when I heard the first whisper. "Is that her?" A woman asked, her pearls glinting under the lights. "The sister." "Yes," another replied, lowering her voice though not enough to hide the disdain. "I heard she washed out of the army. Works security now, I think. Some kind of guard job." "Tragic, really," the first woman said. "Allison is so accomplished. It is a shame her sister never measured up." The words slid across the room like knives. I kept my eyes on the tablecloth, tracing the pattern with my finger, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I had been called worse. I had been underestimated before. What was one more evening of swallowing their ignorance? Still, the sting was real. 2 decades of service, medals tucked away, scars hidden under sleeves, and all they could see was failure. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way that expensive weddings always are. Allison glided down the aisle on the arm of a man she had chosen to stand in as father, since ours had been gone for years. Her dress shimmered under the soft light, and she looked radiant, confident, every bit the professor marrying into a family of prestige. I watched from the back row, surrounded by strangers, and for a moment I let myself drift. I remembered us as children, running barefoot across our yard, whispering secrets under the covers at night. I remembered believing that no matter what paths we chose, we would still be sisters above all else. Somewhere along the way, that bond had cracked. Maybe it was the distance of deployments. Maybe it was the way I returned home quieter, less willing to explain myself. Or maybe it was simply that Allison had always needed to stand taller, even if it meant pressing me down. The vows were exchanged, the kiss sealed their promise, and applause rose like thunder. I clapped politely, the sound hollow in my own ears. At the reception, the music swelled, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the grand hall. I stood near the edge of the room, a club soda in hand, watching from the margins. My colleagues from the nonprofit mingled with donors, grateful for the generosity of the groom's family. I tried to focus on that, on the fact that this event also meant more resources for veterans who needed it. But the whispers kept circling. She never adjusted to civilian life. She is working some low job, I heard. Poor Allison, carrying that burden of a sister. I had trained myself over the years to let words roll off me, but this time, surrounded by people who judged without knowing, I felt the old heat rise in my chest. The same burn I had felt that night at the dinner table when Thomas slid a check across the wood. The same fire I had carried overseas when someone doubted my ability to lead. It was not anger, not exactly. It was the ache of invisibility. Then something unexpected happened. One of my colleagues, Marcus, a veteran himself who had been with me on the sting operation at the motel, stepped up to the microphone. He was supposed to thank the donors on behalf of the center, to say a few words about how their generosity had made programs possible. But Marcus had never been one to stick to scripts. "I want to take a moment," he said, his voice steady, echoing through the hall, "to introduce someone you may not know. Someone who represents the best of what service really means." My heart sank. I knew where he was going. Marcus turned toward me, his eyes warm with the same respect I had seen when we stood shoulder to shoulder that cold night months ago. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet my colleague and my friend, Katherine O'Neill." The crowd shifted, heads turning, conversations dying mid-sentence. The spotlight of attention, unwanted and sharp, landed on me. I froze. My first instinct was to shake my head, to wave him off, to remain in the shadows where I had grown comfortable. But Marcus kept speaking. "She served this country for 20 years in the Army as a military police officer. She deployed twice to the Middle East. She earned medals she never talks about because that is not who she is. And after retiring, instead of chasing comfort, she chose to spend her days helping veterans who have nothing, and rescuing young women who might not be alive today without her." The room fell silent. Even the clink of silverware seemed to pause. Allison's smile, frozen on her face as she stood at the head table, faltered. Have you ever been thrust into a moment you did not want, only to realize it was the moment you had needed all along? That was what it felt like standing in that hall with every eye fixed on me. I rose slowly, my legs steady though my heart thundered. I walked toward the front, each step echoing in the cavernous room. I could see faces shifting, surprise softening into curiosity, curiosity bending into respect. When I reached the microphone, I let out a breath I had been holding for years. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, "but I am not here tonight for recognition. I am here because this work is bigger than me. Because there are veterans in this country who deserve dignity. Because there are girls out there who need someone to show up when the world has turned away." I paused, scanning the crowd. Service does not end when you take off the uniform. It continues in the choices we make every day to stand for those who cannot stand alone. That is why I do what I do. Not for applause, not for status, but because it matters. The silence that followed was profound. And in that silence, I felt something shift, not just in the room, but inside myself. Before I continue to the second half of this chapter, let me ask you this. Have you ever had someone speak up for you when you could not or would not speak for yourself? How did it feel to be seen after so long of being invisible? Share in the comments. It might remind someone else that they too are worthy of being recognized. For a long moment after I spoke, the hall remained still. The air felt charged, as if every crystal on the chandeliers had drawn in a breath. Then slowly, hands began to come together. A few claps at first, tentative, then building into applause that rolled through the room like a tide. I had not asked for it, and yet I felt it land on me, heavier than any metal pin to my chest. I gave a small nod, then stepped back from the microphone, grateful for the chance to retreat into the crowd. But retreat was not in the cards. I caught sight of Allison at the head table, her expression tight, the practiced smile stretched thin. She excused herself from her new husband's side and made her way toward me. I could see the storm in her eyes before she spoke. "Katherine," she hissed, her voice low but sharp, "what are you doing? This is my wedding, not your stage." I met her gaze, steady, calm. I did not ask for the microphone. Marcus thought it was time people knew the truth. Her hands clenched at her sides, the diamond on her finger flashing under the lights. "You made me look like a liar. I told Preston's family you were fine, that you had moved on quietly. Now they think I hid something." "You did hide something," I replied. "You hid me because you were ashamed." The words hung between us, raw and undeniable. For the first time in years, I saw Allison falter. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes flickered. But pride is a stubborn thing. She lifted her chin. "You could have stayed in the shadows, that would have been kinder." "Kinder to who?" I asked. "To you, to them, or to the version of me you invented so you could feel taller?" It was then that Preston's mother approached, flanked by two relatives who had been whispering earlier. Her face was pale, lips pressed into a thin line. "So you are Katherine," she said, studying me as if I were a puzzle she had misjudged. "I am," I answered simply. "We were told you had struggled," she said carefully. "That you were working in modest circumstances." "I have worked where I was needed," I said. "Sometimes that was overseas, sometimes it was at a shelter, and sometimes it was in the middle of the night pulling girls out of vans they never should have been in. Struggles, yes, but not failure." Her eyes widened, a flicker of shame crossing her face. For once, she had no clever response. Behind her, Thomas appeared, his usual swagger dampened by unease. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Katie," he said, his voice softer than I expected, "is all of that true?" I nodded, every word. He exhaled slowly, his hand tightening around the stem of his glass. I did not know. You did not want to know," I said gently. "That is the difference." The room had gone quiet again, all ears tilted toward the unfolding scene. Allison's cheeks burned crimson, Preston shifting uncomfortably beside her. The carefully constructed image of a flawless family had cracked, and everyone could see the fracture. I did not gloat. There was no triumph in it, only truth. I turned back to the microphone, though I had not planned to speak again. The words rose unbidden, carried by years of silence. "I did not come here to embarrass anyone," I began. "I came because our work with veterans is supported by this family, and I wanted to honor that. But since the truth is out, let me say this: worth is not measured in titles or paychecks. Worth is measured in the lives we touch, in the dignity we defend, in the courage we carry when no one is watching." I let my gaze sweep the room, catching eyes, holding them. Do not mistake silence for failure. Sometimes the quietest battles are the hardest one. This time, when the applause came, it was immediate and strong. No hesitation, no polite pretense. It was genuine. I stepped down, leaving the microphone behind, and found my seat at the back. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted my glass of soda. Marcus leaned over, grinning. "About time, O'Neill." I managed to smile. "I did not want this." "Maybe not," he said, "but you needed it." Across the room, Allison sat stiffly at the head table, her laughter forced, her eyes darting toward me every few minutes. I could not tell if she hated me or envied me or both. Perhaps she was just beginning to realize that hiding truth never works forever. Preston, on the other hand, surprised me. When the dinner plates were cleared and the music began again, he walked over to my table. He looked nervous, almost boyish, his polished confidence stripped away. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I believed things that were not true, and I let those lies shape how I saw you." I nodded. "It happens." "No," he said firmly. "It should not have. I am a doctor. I am supposed to see people clearly. Tonight I saw you clearly for the first time, and I am honored." There was sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time all evening I felt something ease inside me. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Some guests came to shake my hand, to thank me, to ask quiet questions. Others avoided me, embarrassed by what they had said earlier. I did not seek them out. I had nothing to prove. When the band played its final song and the lights dimmed, I slipped out quietly. I stepped into the cool night air, the stars sharp against the dark sky. The sounds of laughter and music faded behind me as I walked to my car. As I slid into the driver's seat, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. For years I had carried the weight of being unseen, dismissed, diminished. Tonight, for the first time, I felt that weight lift. Not because of applause, not because the truth was finally spoken, but because I had stood in it without flinching. Driving home, the road stretched before me, dark and open. My hands rested easy on the wheel, my heart steady. I thought about Allison, about Thomas, about the way the world measures worth. And I thought about those girls stepping out of the van into the cold night, clutching each other's hands, eyes wide with the possibility of freedom. That was my measure. Not chandeliers or champagne, not titles or applause, but freedom, dignity, life. To those listening now, let me ask you this. Have you ever had to stand in front of people who misjudged you and hold your ground? Not with anger, but with truth? How did it change you? Share in the comments. Your story might be the encouragement someone else is waiting for. That night, as I turned into my driveway, I realized something profound. The best revenge was not the applause, not the shock on Allison's face, not the murmurs in that glittering hall. The best revenge was simply living a life of service, of courage, of quiet integrity, no matter who chose to see it. And I would keep living that life. I had not planned to speak again that night. My heart had already carried more weight than I thought it could bear. But as the music quieted and conversations stilled, a strange calm washed over me. Something in the room, something in me demanded honesty. I rose slowly, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I was not in uniform, not draped in ribbons or medals, not shielded by any symbols of authority. It was just me, Katherine O'Neill, standing in front of people who had written my story for me without ever asking me to tell it. The microphone felt cool in my hand. I glanced around the room, faces half lit by chandeliers, wine glasses raised but forgotten, eyes waiting. "My name is Katherine," I began, steady, quiet enough that people leaned closer to hear. "Many of you already think you know who I am. Maybe you have heard that I was the sister who never quite found her place. Maybe you were told I came home from the army broken, with nothing left to give. Maybe you thought I was someone to be pitied." I paused, letting the silence grow. "But I want you to hear the truth from me." I drew in a slow breath, letting the words flow not as a speech but as a confession. I enlisted at 19, like so many kids who believed service was a calling greater than themselves. I spent 20 years in the army. 20 years of patrols, of dust storms, of sleepless nights spent listening for sounds that meant danger. I deployed twice to the Middle East. I lost friends. I folded flags and handed them to families who had given more than anyone should. I carried scars that do not show and memories I would not wish on anyone. And yet I carried them with pride. My voice wavered just enough for the weight of it to be felt. When I retired at 39, I thought my fight was over. But I learned quickly that service never really ends. It changes shape. For me, it became helping the veterans who had nowhere to go. It became sitting with men who had seen too much and did not know how to come back from it. It became answering calls in the middle of the night when someone's daughter had been trapped by people who thought her life was nothing more than a transaction. It became guiding her out into the light. The room was utterly still. Even the waiters had stopped moving. I gripped the edge of the podium, my voice growing firmer. "I am not saying this to be praised. I am saying it because I want you to understand that honor is not found in wealth, or in titles, or in appearances that make us look respectable in rooms like this one. Honor lives in how we treat the people around us. It lives in whether we show up when someone else is drowning. It lives in the quiet, unseen choices we make that no one ever applauds. My eyes swept the hall, landing on Allison. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her lips trembling as she tried to hold herself together. She looked at me the way a child looks at a stranger, as if she had never truly seen me before. Beside her, Thomas stared at the floor, his hand covering his mouth. He looked smaller than I had ever known him to be, as if the sharp edges of his arrogance had been stripped away in a single evening. And beyond them, Allison's new family, wealthy, polished, used to power, sat in stunned silence. Their expressions shifted slowly, the smug curiosity fading into something closer to respect. I let the silence linger a beat longer, then finished softly. If there is one thing I have learned, it is this. Titles fade, money vanishes, but the lives we save, the dignity we protect, that lasts. That is honor. That is what I choose to carry. I stepped back from the microphone. For one heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then, as if a dam had broken, applause erupted. Not the scattered, polite clapping of earlier, but a wave that rose and filled the hall, genuine and unforced. I stood still, letting it wash over me, not as validation, but as acknowledgement. For the first time in years, I was not invisible. Allison rose from her seat, her face wet with tears. She moved toward me, her gown trailing like a ghost across the polished floor. When she reached me, she opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, she reached for my hand, holding it tightly, as if she might anchor herself in the truth she had just heard. "I am sorry," she whispered, barely audible over the applause. "I did not know. I should have seen you." Her tears glistened under the lights, and for the first time in decades, I saw not the professor, not the bride, but my sister. The girl who had once shared secrets with me under the covers, who had once promised we would always stand together. Thomas did not come forward right away. He stayed at his table, his head bowed, his shoulders heavy. But when the applause began to fade, he lifted his eyes to mine. The pride was gone. In its place was something quieter, regret. Afterward, as people resumed their meals, as music cautiously filled the air again, I sat at my table with Marcus. He leaned toward me, a half-smile playing at his lips. "You realize you just changed the entire narrative of this wedding," he said. "I did not come here to change anything," I replied. "I just wanted the truth to be heard." "Sometimes," he said, lifting his glass, "that is exactly what changes everything." When the night wound down, people came to me one by one. Some shook my hand, thanking me for my service. Others simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that words could not capture. Preston's father, a man of few expressions, clasped my shoulder firmly and said, "You have my respect, Katherine." Even Preston himself approached, his usual confidence replaced by humility. "I did not know how much Allison's words had hidden," he admitted, "but I am proud to have you as family." I nodded. "Thank you." Later, as I slipped out into the night, the stars stretched wide above me. I thought about everything that had just unfolded. Years of silence, of shame pressed upon me by others, had lifted with a few minutes of truth, and I realized something profound. I had not spoken for them. I had spoken for me. If you are listening now, let me ask you this. Have you ever had to stand in front of people you loved and speak your truth, even knowing it might shatter the image they had of you? What gave you the courage to do it? Share your story in the comments. Your voice might remind someone else that they are not alone when it is their turn to speak. When the last of the applause faded and the music returned, the hall shifted back into celebration. Guests laughed again, waiters hurried with trays, the band struck a softer tune to coax people toward the dance floor. Yet for me, the air still hummed with the weight of what had been spoken. I felt like I had stepped through a doorway that could never be closed again. Allison had retreated to her seat, blotting her face with a napkin. She smiled when guests approached, but her eyes stayed glassy, her mind elsewhere. I knew that look. I had worn it myself too many times when the world demanded composure even as my heart unraveled inside. I decided to give her space. Instead, I slipped away from the crowd, finding a quiet alcove by a window overlooking the gardens. The moon hung low, silver light spilling across the manicured hedges. I pressed a hand against the cool glass, grounding myself. For years I had carried the truth alone. Tonight I had released it into the open air, and though it was heavy, it no longer belonged solely to me. I was not alone for long. Thomas found me first. I heard the click of his polished shoes before I saw him, his figure reflected faintly in the glass. "Do you mind?" he asked, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. No, I said, turning to face him. He looked older tonight, lines carved deeper into his forehead, the sheen of his expensive suit doing little to hide the slump of his shoulders. He ran a hand through his hair, hesitated, then met my eyes. I owe you an apology, he said plainly. What I said to you 3 years ago, sliding that check across the table, it was cruel. I told myself I was helping, but the truth is I wanted to erase the discomfort of seeing you live differently than me. His honesty caught me off guard. Thomas had always been the golden son, the one who never faltered, never admitted weakness. Hearing him speak without armor felt almost foreign. You cannot erase discomfort, I replied quietly. You can only learn from it. That is what I had to do in the army. Every day we faced things we wanted to run from, but we stayed because lives depended on it. He lowered his gaze. And I stayed safe in my office, building a life on paper while convincing myself yours was less because it did not look like mine. That was arrogance. I studied him for a moment, then asked, why tell me this now? Because seeing you tonight, he said, his voice thick, I realized I never really knew my sister. I only knew the version of you I created to make myself feel better. Silence stretched between us. I let the weight of his words sink in. Finally, I nodded. It is not too late to know me, Thomas, but it has to be based on truth, not assumptions. He looked up, eyes shining in a way I had not expected. I would like that, if you will let me. I gave him the smallest of smiles. We will see. It was not forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. Later, Allison came to me. She had shed her bouquet, her hands twisting nervously as she approached. Her gown trailed behind her like a wave of silk, but her face was bare, stripped of performance. Katherine, she said softly, almost as if afraid to speak my name aloud. I waited. I need you to know I was wrong about all of it. I wanted so badly to fit into Preston's world, to be accepted by his family, that I convinced myself you were a liability. I thought if I hid you, if I rewrote you into someone smaller, it would make me look bigger. But all it did was make me cruel. Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her mouth before continuing. I should have been proud of you, always. I should have shouted your name from the rooftops. Instead, I erased you, and I will never forgive myself for that. Her tears fell freely now, smudging the last of her makeup. I swallowed hard, my chest tight. Allison, you hurt me more than you realize. Being dismissed by strangers is one thing, but being dismissed by my own sister, it cut deeper than anything the army ever threw at me. I know, she whispered, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right, if you let me. I reached out then, my fingers brushing hers. For years we had lived oceans apart emotionally, but in that touch I felt the echo of the girls we had once been, the sisters who shared whispered dreams under the covers. I do not know if I am ready to forgive you fully, I admitted, but I am ready to start again. Her shoulders sagged with relief, and she pulled me into a tentative embrace. It was awkward at first, stiff with years of distance, but then it softened. And for the first time in decades, I let myself hold her back. As the night waned and guests began to drift home, I found myself standing alone again, watching couples dance their last dance. The chandeliers sparkled, the band played one final song, and laughter spilled into the halls. Yet I felt something deeper than celebration. I felt release. I had spoken my truth. I had faced the very people who had written me off, and I had walked away not diminished but whole. On the drive home, headlights carving through the dark, I thought about what honor truly meant. Not the medals tucked in drawers, not the applause of strangers, but the quiet conviction of knowing you stood firm in who you were. My family might never fully understand the choices I had made, but for the first time I no longer needed them to. To those of you listening, let me ask you this. Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship that seemed broken beyond repair? What did it take for you to open that door again? Share your story in the comments. Your words may be the hope someone else is waiting for tonight. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered on. I sat for a moment in the stillness, the night air cool against my skin. I thought of the faces from earlier, the veterans at the shelter, the girls stepping out of the van, the families who would never know the battles fought in silence. And I thought of Allison's tears, Thomas's bowed head, Preston's humility. The truth had been revealed. The masks had fallen. And in that unveiling, something unexpected had begun, not just respect, not just reconciliation, but the possibility of healing. I stepped out of the car, my shoes crunching softly on the gravel. Above me the stars stretched wide, unbothered by the noise of human pride and shame. I lifted my chin to them, breathed deep, and whispered into the night, "This is enough." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The wedding hall emptied slowly that night. Guests trickled toward the valet line, laughter spilling out into the cool air, the sound of heels clicking against marble. I lingered at my table, watching candles burn lower, their wax dripping onto linen. The clatter and music had faded, but in my chest the echoes of what had just happened still stirred. Allison found me first. Her gown was slightly wrinkled, the hem stained from a long night of dancing and tears. She looked less like the picture-perfect bride and more like a woman stripped bare of illusions. Her hands trembled as she reached across the table. "Katherine," she began, her voice raw, "I do not know how to undo the years I made you feel small. I let my fear of what other people thought drown out the love I should have shown you. I saw your silence and decided it meant failure. But tonight I saw the truth, and I will never forget it." She wiped at her eyes, smearing what little mascara remained. "I am sorry for every word, every glance, every time I turned you into someone less than you are." I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman was no longer the sister who smirked at my old jeans in our childhood kitchen. She was no longer the professor who hid me from her academic peers. Tonight she was simply Allison, a woman who had made mistakes and now stood vulnerable in the ruins of her pride. "I hear your apology," I said gently. "But Allison, you need to understand something. Worth was never about medals or titles. It was never about charity boards or degrees. Every honest day of work, whether it is washing dishes or commanding soldiers in battle, deserves respect. I only hope one day you believe that as deeply as I do." Her eyes filled again, but she nodded, clutching my hand tighter. Thomas joined us soon after, his tie loosened, his face weary. He sat down heavily, eyes flicking between us. For once there was no smugness in his tone. "Katie," he said, the nickname sounding awkward on his tongue after so many years. "I owe you more than one apology. I judged you by the wrong standards. I measured everything by promotions and income, and when your life did not fit that mold, I assumed you had failed. That was my blindness, my arrogance. I see it now." His honesty surprised me, but it did not undo the sting of the years behind us. "You saw me," I said quietly, "but only through the lens of what you thought success meant. You never asked me what gave me purpose. You never asked what battles I was fighting after the uniform came off." Thomas lowered his head, shame tightening his jaw. "You are right. I did not ask. I did not want to, because asking would mean facing the truth that I did not understand your kind of courage." Silence stretched between us, not hostile but heavy with things long unsaid. Finally, I reached across the table and touched his arm. "I do not need you to understand all of it, Thomas. I only need you to respect that every path has value, even the ones you cannot measure." His eyes glistened as he nodded. In that quiet corner of the wedding hall, with candles flickering low and music fading down the hallway, something shifted between us. Years of bitterness did not vanish in an instant, but they cracked, and through the cracks light seeped in. When I finally left, the night air wrapped around me cool and clean. I walked slowly to my car, heels clicking on pavement, stars spread wide above. I slid into the driver's seat and sat there for a long time before turning the key. The silence inside my car was not the hollow emptiness of before, it was peace. For the first time in decades, I felt no need to prove myself, no need to carry the weight of my family's judgment. I was 42 years old. I had fought battles seen and unseen. I had saved lives, carried grief, and chosen service over applause. And now, finally, I understood something I should have known long ago. I did not need anyone's approval to be whole. The approval I had been chasing, the respect withheld for so many years, had never been the true prize. The real reward was the stillness I carried now, the quiet knowledge that I had lived with integrity, that my life had mattered in ways that titles and money could never capture. I smiled to myself, the kind of smile that comes not from triumph but from release. As the road stretched ahead of me, headlights cutting through the dark, I thought of all the people listening now. People who have been dismissed, underestimated, written off by those who should have stood by them. People carrying scars no one can see. If that is you, I want you to hear this. You do not need anyone's permission to live with dignity. Your worth is not in their eyes. It is in the way you keep showing up, even when no one thanks you. It is in the way you carry your quiet battles with strength. So let me ask you, Have you ever had that moment when you realized you no longer needed someone else's approval to feel whole? What gave you the courage to claim that freedom? Share it in the comments, because your story may give someone else the push to keep walking their own path. That night, as I drove home from the wedding, I carried no anger. Not for Allison, not for Thomas, not even for all the whispers in that glittering hall. Instead, I carried peace, because I had learned what true freedom felt like. And it was not in applause or forgiveness. It was in the quiet acceptance of who I was. The hum of the engine and the rhythm of the tires against the road gave me time to think. I have always done my clearest thinking while driving at night. Maybe it is the way the world goes quiet, or maybe it is the way headlights carve out just enough road to remind you that you do not need to see the whole path to keep moving forward. As I drove home from the wedding, memories from my 20 years of service rose like old photographs. I remembered the desert air that stung my skin, the distant thunder of artillery, the stillness of night watches when I whispered prayers into the darkness. I remembered carrying gear that weighed more than my own body some days, and carrying the grief of folded flags that weighed more than all of it. And then I remembered the small moments, teaching a young private how to lace his boots so he would not trip on patrol, listening to a friend share stories of her daughter back home, her voice trembling with longing, sharing a packet of instant coffee in a tent while the rain hammered canvas. Those were not medals, but they were the moments that made us whole. When I returned to civilian life, I thought all of that would vanish. I thought service was something I had left behind at the gates of the base. But I was wrong. Service simply changed uniforms. It became nights in shelters, listening to veterans who had lost everything. It became answering calls from frightened girls trapped in cars that smelled of fear. It became holding the hands of strangers who needed someone to remind them that they were not invisible. That is what made me smile as I drove home. Because for the first time in years, I realized my life had not been about proving anyone wrong. It had been about living right. I pulled into my driveway and shut off the engine. The porch light flickered on, bathing the yard in a soft glow. I sat there for a while, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine, breathing in the stillness. For years I had chased peace as if it were something far away. But tonight I found it sitting quietly in my own chest. I thought about Allison. I thought about the way her tears had washed away her pride, how she had finally seen me not as a shadow but as her sister. I thought about Thomas, his voice unsteady, admitting he had judged me by standards that never mattered. Their apologies did not erase the past, but they opened a door, and I no longer felt the need to slam it shut. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about forgetting what had been said or done. It was about releasing myself from the weight of carrying it. Inside my house, I hung up my dress and set my shoes by the door. I walked barefoot into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The ordinary clink of the glass against the counter felt grounding. Ordinary moments had become sacred to me. Maybe that was the gift of service, learning to treasure what others overlooked. As I sat at the kitchen table, the quiet wrapped around me. I thought about all the people out there who felt unseen. The waitress at the diner who works 2 shifts to feed her children. The janitor who cleans offices long after everyone has gone home. The veteran who sleeps under a bridge because his mind never came back from war. I wanted them to hear what I had learned. Every honest day of work, every act of kindness, every choice to endure with dignity is worthy of respect. We do not measure lives in trophies or bank accounts. We measure them in the way we keep showing up, even when the world is blind to our effort. That is the lesson my military years carved into me. Not that courage only exists on battlefields, but that courage lives in ordinary people who keep going when they are dismissed, underestimated, or forgotten. To those of you who are listening, I want to ask this. Who in your life has gone unseen for too long? Who do you owe a word of gratitude or perhaps an apology? It might be a parent, a coworker, a neighbor, or even yourself. Share it in the comments. You never know who might find hope in your story. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. Faces drifted through my mind. The soldiers I served beside, the veterans I had helped, the young girls who had stepped into the light after nights of terror. They were not headlines. They were not names etched on plaques. They were lives, fragile and precious, now given another chance. And knowing I had played even a small part in that was enough. At 42, I finally understood that peace does not come from recognition. It comes from knowing you lived true to yourself even when no one applauded. It comes from carrying scars with pride because each one proves you were strong enough to survive. That night, as I turned off the porch light and headed to bed, I whispered a prayer for Allison and Thomas, for all the people who had doubted me, and for myself. Not a prayer for revenge or vindication, just a prayer for release, for healing, because the truth is the greatest victory is not making others bow to your story. The greatest victory is standing tall in it yourself. So if you take one thing from my story, let it be this. You do not need their approval. You do not need their applause. You only need your own peace. And that peace comes from living with honor, however you define it. For me, honor was 20 years in uniform. Honor was stepping into shelters at midnight. Honor was speaking the truth in a hall full of people who once whispered about me. For you, it might look different, but it will always be the same at its core, living with courage, with dignity, with love. And that is enough. Before we close, I would love to hear from you. What does honor mean to you in your own life? Is it in the work you do, the family you care for, the struggles you endure quietly? Share in the comments. These stories of quiet honor remind us all that we are never alone. And if this story spoke to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way we can keep sharing stories of resilience, of courage, of veterans and ordinary people who remind us of what truly matters. Thank you for listening. May you find peace in your own journey, just as I have found in mine.